I now want to turn to our keynote address. Before introducing Hossein, I do want to take a moment to express CPR and my condolences on the tragic loss of the son of Hossein's boss, the CEO of Microsoft. Zain Nadella was only 26 years old. May his memory be for a blessing. Now let me introduce Hossein Nowbar. Hossein is General Counsel of Corporate Legal Affairs and Corporate Secretary at Microsoft. He has worked at Microsoft for 25 years. Hossein has responsibility for a variety of functions, from IP to litigation to compliance and ethics, as well as to strategic projects. He well understands the intersection of law and technology. It has been wonderful to get to know Hossein, and I am pleased now to share that opportunity with all of you. So please join me in welcoming Hossein Nowbar.
Thank you, Alan. Before I start, I just wanted to recognize, like Alan did, our event co-chairs, Cindy Randall from Microsoft and Bruce Bird from Palo Alto Networks, as well as Ellen and everybody at CPR who is bringing this amazing event together. It's really telling and speaks volumes for CPR to be, talking today about an issue that is actually very much playing out in Ukraine, about the role of technology and how it can be very productive or be also used for destructive purposes. I will hit some of those topics later on in this dialogue, but at first I wanted to explain my appearance. Some of you may see my face is fairly scarred up. I could have used some of my, what I would say, dispute prevention skills last night before I decided to hop on a Lime scooter because I was jet lagged and couldn't sleep. Let's just say that I ended up with a pretty good dispute with the cement that managed to absolutely and comprehensively hurt every part of my body. But aside from that, now you know why I look like I'm a little beat up. I wanted to just say how humbled I am to be here and how much I appreciate the audience joining this presentation from around the world. In the prep call, I heard numbers between 15 and 17, and I understand coming to you from London right now, the time zone differences and the commitment it takes to this topic and willing to listen to speakers like me. I was also very humbled to be asked because I know, you had General Mattis, Dana Bash, civil rights leader Andrew Young, and they shared some amazing insights, and to follow in those footsteps is truly, truly humbling. When I met with Cindy and Alan and Ellen to prep for this keynote, one of the things they told me is just begin by talking about your own personal journey and how you came to where you are today. As my chief of staff, Nancy King, who's on this call, can tell you, I can talk about myself forever, but I'll try to keep this fairly brief. So last July, I became the General Counsel and Corporate Secretary of Microsoft's Corporate Legal Affairs. But my journey really started when I was 5 years old. I grew up in Tehran, and my parents were having a career dialogue with my brother, who's about 5.5 years older. And they were putting a tremendous amount of pressure on him to become a doctor, as you would expect. Just to be inclusive, my family asked me, well, Hossein, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to be a fighter pilot. My mother said, over my dead body, you will not be a fighter pilot. And then I had my very first career crisis at age 5. I said to my parents, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. And my brother, who was being a smart aleck, said, well, you talk a lot. You should think about becoming a lawyer. And I looked at my father, who's a man of few words, and he said, your brother has a point. So at age 5, I really made a career choice that has brought me to where I am today. And that journey kind of evolved. I grew up in Iran in the late 70s, and you all know what happened in 1979. That was around the time I moved to the United States. I wish I had been a little bit older. It's fortunately not too many people get to live through a revolution. And I wish I just understood the dynamics and the conflict and the tensions a little bit better than a 10-year-old child. Thank you, Alan, for mentioning Zane. I came to this country because I had a special needs brother who had some of the same complications as Zane. And really, he proved to be a blessing for my family, since I think my older brother and I would have been of draft age for the Iran-Iraq war. When we moved here, we moved to Seattle, partially because of Children's Hospital, where Zane was being treated as well. And I kind of grew up in Kirkland, and because of my brother's needs, I chose to stay very close to the family. I only applied to, I think, 2 universities, both in Washington State, and only a handful of law schools, and ended up staying very local. I joined Davis Wright Tremaine as a litigator. That's what I thought lawyers are to do. I was a litigator at Davis for about 4 years, and some part along the way, I really grew an appreciation for solving problems. And I'll get into that a little bit more later, but I joined Microsoft then, I think, gosh, as a 4th-year lawyer. They were foolish enough to trust me to be the lead lawyer of the entire Office family of products, our developer tool suite, and our developer relations group. So overnight, by revising the EULA, I became a very prolific legal author, because a copy of the end user license agreement was in every copy of Office throughout the world. But as the years went on, I just volunteered to take on the most technical and challenging work, products and accompanying legal work. This kind of came from the fundamental, you could call it kind of an immigrant mindset of just making yourself as valuable as you can by doing the hardest work that you can possibly do, to kind of always accrue to the impact and value that you bring to any environment. And so for 23 years, I had the privilege of working on some amazing cutting edge technologies. I won't bore you with all of it, but a few samplings are the common object model, the back office servers like Exchange and SQL Server, Windows Server, security system architectures, and ultimately really helped build out every aspect of the Microsoft cloud. And that's both on the infrastructure as a service and the software as a service, which is now Office 365. So it's been a really fun ride. And my last job was basically being the lead lawyer for our entire cloud and artificial intelligence, business. But having said that, I don't want to come across as a complete technology wonk. One of the things that was a consistent theme throughout my career was my love, and my passion for resolving conflicts. As a litigator, you're always told, you need to be a zealous advocate for your clients. And as misguided as I was, I always felt like that meant like I had to win at all costs for my clients. But I didn't realize that winning sometimes isn't picking the fight. Winning sometimes is really avoiding the fight. And along the ways, I played a lot of what I would say conflict resolution roles. I played a key role on settling our Sun Microsystems private antitrust litigation with us. I really reimagined or helped reimagine the Nokia relationship. If you all remember, in the EU antitrust days, Nokia was the European company that brought European legitimacy to the case. And I was put in charge of working with them to license our Active Sync license, which then led into a kind of building a trusted relationship that ultimately culminated in us buying Nokia. So I had the privilege of doing that. During that same time, during the EU antitrust matters, we're dealing with IBM. the tech companies can compete, but they can also collaborate. And what we're collaborating on were on our web services protocols to be able to get, a system-oriented architecture where you can have disparate applications talk to each other. And that was something that was happening. We're collaborating on the technology front while we're fighting, whether by a proxy battle in the EU or a direct battle in their antitrust case against us. And I think probably my biggest, proudest kind of conflict resolution has to do around open source. I was on the team from Microsoft who did the deal with Novell Software that actually monetized our patents against open source. But I quickly realized that I think that although that was a victory in the short term, in the long term, open source was going to change the world. So I became very much an advocate for redoing our open source policies and creating exceptions so we could, contribute to the community, eventually culminating with us hosting Linux on Azure, buying GitHub, joining OIN, and becoming what I would say a first tier contributor or citizen of the open source community. So really what I love about my job is that it has afforded me the opportunity to fulfill kind of my innate curiosity of how things work. And that's what really had brought me to litigation to begin with, partially because I felt like every time I spent time on a subject, I walked away with new learnings and expertise. But in this role, I've been able to kind of combine some of that innate curiosity with law and embracing the opportunity to solve what I would say insurmountable conflicts that are both helped and sometimes what I would say exasperated by technology. This is especially important in my current role. One of the things that I've really learned to appreciate is the role that CPR plays to the community after learning that Microsoft was a signatory to the pledge to pursue dispute prevention in business relationships. And I kind of reflected on this a little bit. And I think, our participation with CPR really reflects our corporate learning that although it can be fun to fight a battle or get into a fight, it's typically much more rewarding for us to strike a deal, and certainly in most cases, the most constructive way to make progress. And this is where I think, as Alan was saying, the CPR's vision is so important to help businesses manage conflicts, prevent conflicts, and to enable purpose. And harnessing the insights and experiences of its members to prevent and solve business dispute is key to the evolution of what I would say law and technology. So, since CPR has been such a gracious host, some of the things that really were highlighted to me as part of kind of our engagement with CPR is, this kind of like four core roles that CPR plays for us with technology companies. One is just, helping us resolve or prevent fights within the industry, whether it's, anti-competition work or whether it's IP litigation. Another one is, helping us solve disputes with our supply chain. With some of the ESG issues, I think the interrelationship of companies and their supply chain is becoming up more and more and becoming more important. And some of those relationships end up in serious disputes. And CPR's help with that has been extremely helpful. The other one is just, how do you arbitrate through complex emerging technologies like AI, like blockchain, the concepts of AI ethics, BIPA laws, and things like that. And finally, and this goes back to the Ukraine piece, disputes related to cybersecurity or data breach incidents. So as a lawyer, I can say that we are in need of stronger, faster, and more flexible dispute management tools and systems. As a technology lawyer, I would say that, kind of this alternate dispute resolution offers really flexible solutions, that allow us to not only solve problems, but to use technology in identifying them and creating greater opportunities to avoid them in the first place. So in the prep call that we had here, I was joking with Ellen, and I was like saying, I think conflict is just innate in human nature. That it's been there since there were more than one human or person on this planet, and I think this is really exasperated in some ways by technology. I think we have to stop thinking of technology as just an industry and really think about it as kind of the backbone of society and economy and our economy. And I don't want to overstate the role of technology, but it's very much like, I read a book a while ago that talked about successful tech. And they said that successful technologies are the ones that become invisible. And the example they had used was with electricity. We no longer think about electricity because it is so integral to our lives that we just assume it's going to be there. And I think that when we look at cloud computing and other aspects of technology, that's going to really take this to a different scale. With Ukraine, for example, one of the organizations that sits with me is the Office of Critical Infrastructure. And one of the things that we saw through our Mystic Microsoft Threat Identification Center was the increasing frequency of cyber attacks on Ukrainian critical infrastructure. So we had worked with the Ukrainian government, with our own government, to identify potential targets. And we could see from the attack vectors where potential kind of physical aggressions could be made. And I think Brad highlighted this in a blog that he both published on Twitter and on LinkedIn. I would encourage all of you to kind of read that and just again, appreciate how much technology is becoming a backbone, because it's now the first battlefront in wars. Second, I think, with greater connectivity and greater access to data and artificial intelligence, and this kind of ubiquitous concept of Internet of Things. I haven't heard that as a statement for a while, but I know it was kind of the buzzword when I visited China several years ago. Technology is both an enabler of progress, but can also give rise to such a diversity of legal compliance and other kind of, what I would say, conflict issues. You all, I know that I work for Brad Smith, and he wrote a book called Tools and Weapons. There's a quote from that book that I think about, and I mean this, I think about it every day. And the quote goes as follows: when your technology changes the world, you bear a responsibility to help address the world you have helped create. Companies that create technologies must accept greater responsibility for the future, and governments will need to regulate technology by moving faster and catching up with the pace of innovation. I don't think anybody on this call, or not too many people on this call, anticipated where the vice chair of a company would ask governments to increase regulation on the company's products. But it really goes to the concept of building trust. And in order to build trust, sometimes you have to embrace conflict. And there's multiple things that we've learned, but one of the ones that I think about all the time is that every perspective is true and every perspective is partial. And what you really need to do is establish a common understanding of the truth. And then you have to get comfortable that there can be multiple truths that can coexist at the same time, and that's okay. And this is a theme that Dana Bash highlighted, and I'm kind of quoting from watching her presentation when she was talking about the conflicts in Washington, D.C. And she said that we weren't starting from the same set of facts. And then she noted that the pandemic drove a wedge in communications. It made it hard to reach across the aisle when folks weren't having lunch next to each other. They were missing that connection. And I think there's an incredible parallel to this with technology. What technology has allowed people to do is go beyond, their neighborhoods, and to be able to use technology to connect with other like-minded people, so they can seek out online groups and connect with them. But the algorithms that technology uses sometimes creates what I would say these echo chambers for these groups. So what they highlight and what's presented to them is based on what they like. So you kind of create this echo chamber that really isolates the group from other groups that may have more diverse opinions. This is one of the things I really appreciated Alan talking about, how some of the panels that you're creating is having more diverse constituents, because if you have more diverse constituents, you have better problem solving. And I think part of the problem with technology is that it's making the world smaller, but it's helping people be more alone together. And that's something that we have to think very deeply about. And this is why I think it is important for us to have regulation in the tech sector to help engender that trust. I mean, frankly, this is why, over the last week, aside from almost killing myself on a scooter, I've been to Washington, D.C., Brussels, and now London. We're here to make a bridge, to create a connection with whether it's that CMA or DG Comp or others, and to establish a collaboration where we can rationalize our truths. Microsoft has a responsibility to our users, has a responsibility to our shareholders. Likewise, take CMA for an example. They have a responsibility to ensure a competitive marketplace. And our approach kind of has been, and we documented this in this 2025 strategy memo, is how do we mediate this tension? It's okay to have multiple or different point of views, and they can coexist at the same time. And a great example of this is, I think many of you have heard about our Activision acquisition. If for nothing else, just the dollar amount of it was, astounding. I was astounded. I expected it in one-digit billions, and at 68, it literally raised many brows around us. But it was an opportunity for us to really establish what I would say our app store, to get the content together, to build that critical mass like Netflix has, or if you have HBO Max has, to kind of create a service that brings greater value to customers. But the way we did it, as Brad and Rima announced, I think it was last week, my time's a little bit running together, was to work and to partner with governments to endorse these App Store principles that are more aligned and more reflective to what the society needs. And it goes back, I'm probably not going to quote this right, but I think in the same book, there was another quote that said, Microsoft had to learn to look in the mirror and see what other people saw instead of seeing what we wanted to see ourselves. And I think that self-reflection is a very important skill that many companies lack. And that self-reflection is a tremendous opportunity for CPR to show, either through the member experiences or through some of the other techniques that you use, to really kind of ground us in the reality that we ought to be grounded in, as opposed to the reality that we want to see, to take that hard look in the mirror. And I think this goes back to, if we can create a dialogue in the community, in the infrastructure of our society, we can solve bigger problems together. And I want to revert back to something, Andrew Young said. And I thought this was such a great quote, because I think, early on, all the lawyers on this call know the old adage of, if the facts are on your side, you pound the facts. If the law's on your side, you pound the law. If neither's on your side, you pound the table. And then, that kind of evolves to the best lawyer isn't the lawyer with the best argument. The best lawyer is the lawyer who defines the battlefield. And this is why I thought Andrew Young's statement was so powerful, and something that I think is very reflective of what we're doing at Microsoft. And I'm not, and I want to say this with the maximum amount of humility, but he said, when you know how to fight, you don't have to fight at all. And I think that's a very important thing that I think as companies mature and become more successful, they need to really know that there is nothing stronger than gentleness or more gentle than strength. And that's the mindset that I think that Microsoft is adopting in the way we embrace the responsibilities that our technologies generate for us as they change the world. So I think with that, Alan, I have talked long enough, and perhaps I could entice you into doing the Q&A.
Well, Hossein, thank you very much. And thank you for your comments. They've really been enlightening, in your perspectives, and also your resilience. That we have to look at what the other guy looks like too. So I'm sure the concrete took its beating as well. But thank you for being here. I know how busy you are. I know how busy things are at Microsoft. So I have to say, it's wonderful to listen to you, your perspectives, your journey. And here you are with really one of the world's great technology companies. And to Brad's blog about technology now being the first battleground of wars, seems spot on. And also Brad in his blog noting You all are not a government. You're not a public agency. And yet Brad and Microsoft is right in the midst of it, working alongside government agencies. That is both, I imagine, exhilarating and also frightening, because after all, you all are a company. And so talk to us a little bit about how you walk that line of engaging in issues so fundamental to the public, to security and so forth as a company, and I guess really sort of engendering the trust that is necessary to be able to assist in these kinds of matters, as is happening here with Ukraine.
What a great question. Look, I think it is interesting. As I've told some people on my team, when I joined Microsoft, I never imagined that we would be talking to our governments, identifying threat vectors for other governments. But this is the beauty of the kind of the electricity example and the cloud. A lot of countries have critical infrastructure, and more the cloud is being seen as critical infrastructure. So whether we like it or not, we're getting pulled into this. And the security space particularly is one that's all about, I remember it was a Mad Comics, Spy versus Spy. It's kind of cloak and dagger. It's very compartmentalized. The white spy doesn't talk to the black spy. But the reality is, they're all people and they're our customers. And one of the beauties of the cloud is by collecting or by having visibility across multiple workloads and multiple areas, we have the ability to get insights and analytics from it. Now, we have to do this in the backdrop of things like GDPR, of sovereignty, of data boundaries. But security is one where, if we embrace our responsibility, it really puts us in a weird role. Like you highlighted, we're not a government, but we play a critical role in helping governments do what they need to do to protect their people. So, I will tell you, it's just fascinating. It's just like as our technology evolves and becomes more and more, adopted, we just see greater opportunities. And there is a threshold moment of saying, is this my fight or is this not my fight? And I say this to people all the time. They say, Hossein, English is your second language. You've had you're an immigrant guy. You kind of, how did you succeed? And I just said, I just have this ownership mindset. And I'm so proud that Microsoft has that. If you see a problem, fix it. Don't just assume it's somebody else's problem. And definitely don't assume it's somebody else's problem if you had a part in causing the problem. I don't know if that's responsive to your question, but it's definitely, what's in my head and how I think about it every day. I really kid you not when I say I think about that quote every day about what is our responsibility to the world because of what we're creating.
Well, and there's sort of that Spider-Man doctrine that you referred to. With greater power comes Spider-Man, one of my great jurisprudential thinkers here. Greater responsibility, greater power comes greater responsibility. But again, as the lead lawyer for the company, you have customers. Customers can be on all sides of a conflict. They could be good guys, they could be bad guys. How do you think about how to deal with customers who may be on what is considered the wrong side of a conflict? What do you, from a legal perspective, how do you manage that kind of a situation?
It's hard. And I think, this is something I say a lot, and the people who work on with me on this team will tell you, is a lot of times when you're trying to get to an outcome, you're never going to make everybody happy. But what you can do is you could get them to accept the outcome by being incredibly transparent and principled. And I think that's what we do. We try to be very transparent, whether it's with our law enforcement data access principles, with our human rights principles and our trusted cloud principles, or whether it's with our AI principles or App Store principles. But knowing who we are and what we want to stand for, what we can do is we can publish those principles up front. And make sure that we set expectations, that our terms of engagement, that our social contract, sometimes a physical contract with each other, are reflective of the way we take responsibility for our obligations. And this has cost us money. Like I am the person who has driven our trusted cloud principles for the last 5+ years. We jointly published them with Google and Amazon. We got several other companies like SAP, Salesforce, and competitors, very, very entrenched competitors, to agree to these principles because we thought it was the right thing to do. And we wanted our technology to be used in a way where 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we didn't feel like we were on the wrong side of history. So I think going back to what your question, I would just say you have to be transparent, you have to be principled, you have to get over yourself and understand that you are one point of view, you are one truth in the dialogue of truths. And then you have to kind of just exercise that mirror analogy that Brad talks about, that I think really has kind of redefined this. And it was so funny because I was talking to DG Comp today. And I can't tell who, because you don't want to ever expose somebody, but there was somebody that actually said, 30 years ago, you all had a much different approach to working with the government and regulators than you do today, and has boded well for you. And the person used the example of being in a Peloton, not the bicycle at home, but the Tour de France type of Peloton, of no longer being the tip of it, but rather kind of drafting, partially because we've learned from the lessons that to be successful, you don't need to win every war. You just need to find the right solution and to resolve the conflict or prevent the conflict. And this is why, again, our engagement with CPR is so important.
Well, we're delighted that you're engaged with us. So you raise in your response sort of one of these great issues that I think we're all wrestling with, of Microsoft as a platform and not wanting to be used for misinformation, disinformation. And yet at the same time, and you're speaking to a group of lawyers here, we think about things like freedom of speech, freedom of ideas, freedom of assembly. Talk to us a bit about, I know the whole technology field is wrestling with this. How do you manage that, where you're a platform? Are you telling people what they can and cannot say, what they can and cannot do? How do you navigate that kind of an issue?
It's hard, like I won't do a good job of covering all this, but I think, we had, what did we have? We have published so many different tools. There's Account Guard, there's the Election Guard, there's the media, investment that we've done to kind of verify the news source, or I don't think there's a great answer for it, and we struggle with it. We struggle with it at times. I personally, as the lead lawyer for our cloud and AI business, struggled with this with the Daily Stormer issues, if you remember, what do you do when someone is kind of, exercising, their First Amendment right? But what do you do when that comes at the cost or at the expense or of other people? And I personally was involved in, going back to saying we need to be transparent and principled. I was personally involved in writing our terms of use. And I remember making the change to the terms of use, because the terms of use had a provision that said you can't use our technology to violate the rights of others. Now, you could argue where that started, because, one of the examples that I gave with CPR was that you help resolve intellectual property issues. And I think that statement had its foundation in intellectual property conflicts. But as our cloud services or our other services became more ubiquitous, the kind of violating the rights of others went beyond the concept of intellectual property rights. So one of the things I personally helped add to that was you can't violate the right of others or enable the violation of the rights of others. And we publish them. and we stand behind them. And that gives us then the ability to say, look, you may be exercising your First Amendment right, but in a very principled and transparent way, we are selecting to not be an enabler of harm to others. And I think there's many different ways. I would just say we're not perfect. Sometimes we get it right. Sometimes we get it wrong. There's technologies. We have one technology. I'm probably not remembering the name of it right now, but basically, in countries that have censorship issues and persecute their people, we have this technology that allowed them to basically hide their IP address destination. They would go to a larger domain, but be able to go and read articles that maybe that local government doesn't appreciate. That same technology was being used by bad actors, on the internet, to hide their identity and hide their activity. So you sometimes have to make judgment calls of where should we take a stand on this? How far should we go? And this is where, like, one of the things, Alan, that you've talked about and Ellen has talked about kind of taking the learnings of your memberships and constituents and taking that learning to inform the decisions of others is very helpful to us, because it goes back. I just remember, torts, and Professor Peck, he had the Socratic method. And if you could just get over being deathly afraid of him calling on you, the answer to every question was the reasonable person standard. Right. So I think when it worked, that if you could just get over yourself and your fear. Maybe I'm wrong. I've never been a plaintiff's lawyer, so I may be completely giving wrong legal advice. That's where they call me the general counsel and not the subject matter specialist.
I understood. Well, take us inside, if I could ask you to, if you're okay with this. So these judgments of who's right, who's wrong, what standards to apply, who's on the right side of an issue and so forth. What is the governance, just if you can talk about it generally, within Microsoft to resolve those issues? What's behind the curtain? How is that judgment made?
Yeah. Let me just clarify one thing. I don't think we try very hard not to make the judgment of who's right or who's wrong, but rather decide what we want our technology to be used for and how we want it to be used. So we draw boundaries around the uses of our technology versus whether or not, one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist, right? And so I just want to clarify that, because I think that we stop short of that. But our process is, Cindy could add to this, and other Nancy or other people who are privy to the Microsoft thing. It really starts with having an outside-in view that Brad Smith is really driven for our company. When I started Microsoft in 1997, we just had an inside-out view. Bill Gates took pride in saying, we don't have a Washington, D.C. office, right? And over time, that cost us a lot. Billions upon billions of dollars. And we now have a variety of different, what I would say, inputs. One input is the most senior people in the organization getting out and talking to people. In 1997, we didn't go out and talk to Janet Reno. I'm here talking to DG Comp and CMA. I think that is very important to contextualize your decision-making and your practices with what the broader society and the kind of industry and regulators and other influentials are thinking. That's one piece. Another thing is we have an advisory council, that works with us. And, it has people from all sorts of political backgrounds, and it has Trevor Noah. He's on our Microsoft Advisory Council, and he's awesome because he was one of the guys who was just talking about, and I'll use his example. He was talking about basically, if you go on a social website and say, I like pie, no one cares. But if you go and say, I hate pie, everyone's going, what? You hate pie? How can you hate pie? Pie is the best thing in the world. Motherhood and apple pie, right? And so people start generating activity, and the algorithms that we have then go ahead and elevate that activity as noteworthy because you've got lots of eyes going on it. And so in a way, the technology becomes this kind of conflict generation mechanism. And it's amazing to have somebody like him on the panel. Or there was another, and again, I shouldn't be quoting, but there was another perspective where he was like, well, yeah, you in developed countries can have this point of view, but these other countries who aren't as developed have a different point of view. And so that kind of diversity of thinking is how we inform, our policies on how we want to enable our technology to be used. And I will tell you, we don't always get it right. And that's the beauty of technology, is you can get it wrong and you can fix it, and you can fix it quickly. That's different than publishing a book. You can't pull back all the books that have bad content in it. But with technology, especially with cloud services, you can at least course correct.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you, that's very reassuring to hear that you're getting those kind of diverse perspectives, and surely it does add a lot of value. Just talking about Ukraine for a moment in particular, which has all of our attention, and given the important role Brad and Microsoft is playing there, what is it you think? We're right in the midst of this conflict. Let's project out. Hopefully we get to the other side of this in as constructive a way as possible. What do you think you'd like folks to think of Microsoft's contributions as having been in working through this particular world conflict, given the role you all are playing?
I would say two things. First of all, thanks for bringing up Brad's name, because he's our secret weapon, by the way. If you think you have a worldly view, you go talk to Brad for half an hour and you just kind of say, wow, you just see the world in such a different way. It's amazing to have him and have the opportunity to learn from him. And the way he just approaches things is very helpful. On the Ukraine thing, I don't know. It's happening real time. And I wish I had like a perfect answer. I would just say that if we look at it over time, I hope people say that Microsoft had the opportunity to do the right thing, and they did the right thing, and that comes at cost. Like I talked about, like our trusted cloud principles, we didn't go into many countries whose law enforcement access practices did not comply with those principles, and basically calling out the Russians or the Chinese and their practices, in how they engage with other companies does not come without risk to Microsoft. It comes at risk for our businesses in those countries. It comes at risk by making us a target of some of those state actions, and I think part of it is just we keep talking about this we meet every Monday morning for Brad's SLT meetings, and one of the things we always talk about is act with courage. You have to act with courage to address your set of responsibilities. So on the Ukraine piece, it's tough, particularly being in Europe right now. In the US, we have the luxury of being a little bit removed. Over here, people are so interconnected. Like, people have friends who are Ukrainian, and we can't forget about the impact on the Russians. I lived through the Iranian hostage crisis, and I remember every night when Dan Rather or Ted Koppel was online and something bad would happen, the next day I would pay for it in school, because people were upset and they didn't know how to differentiate between policies of a nation and the people who hail from that country. And I remember, we talk a lot about allyship. I think it was Dan Rather in one of his sessions actually said, let us not forget that the policies of a nation are different from the beliefs of their people. And I literally felt as an 11-year-old that was such an act of allyship by him to the Iranian Americans. We also have to think about our Russian friends who may not necessarily believe in this, but are getting kind of pushed into the same, what I would say, painted with the same brush. I still get my English idioms wrong, so if I get that wrong, feel free to correct me. But so I think it's hard. It's ever developing. It's very palpable here. It was very much in Brussels. It was very palpable. I haven't spent enough time. I literally came to from the train to this room to talk to you all, so I haven't had enough time around here to get the sense. But I just hope that people look back and just say, it costs Microsoft to do the right thing, and they did the right thing because they acted with courage and they embraced the responsibility of dealing with the technologies that they helped create.
Well, Hossein, that's just wonderful. And thank you so much for sharing your humility, your values, your reflections with us. I think you're really a testament to what Microsoft is able to do, is doing in the world. We love having you all as members of our organization, and good luck to you with your travels, with your work. It's truly transformative stuff and so critical given what's happening in the world. So thank you for taking some time out for us. Go heal and take care of yourself and get rested. We'll look forward to welcoming you when you come back. Thanks, everybody. I tried to get some of the questions there in the chat as well. And so with that, greetings to Hossein and to Microsoft. Thank you very much.